Morning, everybody. We're here today to talk about virtual check and check out. My name is Leanne Hawken. And before we get started today, I wanted to share a little bit about myself and where this work has come from. I'm currently the co-project director for the Behavior Response Support Team, or BURST, as we like to call it, which is a collaboration between the University of Utah and Granite School District to provide Tier 1 and Tier 2 behavior support. And that's with Dr. Aaron Fisher and Dr. Keith Radley at the University of Utah also. So this project and this webinar was developed for that team, but we're also going to share it out with the multi-tiered systems of support. I'm a district coach for the State Board of Education, the Utah State Board of Education. I'm a former professor at the University of Utah, and I've spent the last 20 years doing research on check and check out. I'm board certified behavior analyst, former school psychologist, and I get the privilege of practicing PBIS principles in my home every day with my 11-year-old daughter who also has ADHD. So that's just a little bit about myself and some context. The objectives today for this webinar are, first of all, we have 20 years of research in terms of how do you do check and check outs. And what I'm going to refer to it today as is school-based check and check out. So we've been doing this for 20 years. And I want to make sure if you haven't done school-based check and check out that you have resources for that. And then provide a good overview of what that looks like when we're in school. And then talk about what do we do to take those research-based principles and actually make that work in a virtual setting with distance learning and so forth. We'll talk about additional considerations that you need to really think about to effectively support families and children, and then some really important take-home messages that I will share with you at the end. We'll also have time for questions at the end, so if you can save your questions for the end, that'd be awesome. So a really amazing resource that was created and for those of you that are working in Granite School District, you actually can receive these resources as part of your work in the district. They're online e-learning modules specifically detailing check and check out. And so there's 4 of them. So I highly encourage you to get the overview and you have access, and there's the website to look at those. But there are also some really amazing Tier 1 modules on how do you most effectively implement Tier 1 behavior support. And for those of you who've never done check and check out, the 2 really important resources, there's one coming out in November, which is the 3rd edition of our book. And there's also a video on how do you implement. These are really good resources for if you're not doing check and check out currently, let's get a good understanding of what it's supposed to look like school-based, and then you can help modify for virtual. So before we get started, none of this presentation would have been possible without 2 key resources. The Michigan's Multi-Tiered System of Supports Technical Assistance Center, they did an amazing job creating a brief that talks about adapting check and check out for distance learning. And you can see my colleagues there that are listed that were amazing in sharing this work. And we're going to see some of the videos that they've created today. And also the Center on Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, guidance for adapting check and check out for distance learners. So one thing to know is those are, this PowerPoint presentation will be posted. Those are actual hot links to those resources. So most folks who are going to be watching this know what check and check out is, but I'm going to share just really briefly what it is and what are the basic features for those who don't. It is the most widely implemented Tier 2 intervention for students who are at risk, and is now deemed an evidence-based practice with over 18 years of research. Here's what we know it does. It reduces problem behavior, both externalizing, but also there's some improvement in terms of internalizing behavior with recent research showing that. There's an increase in academic engagement. And what the most exciting part is we're getting reductions in referrals to special education for kids who have behavioral concerns. So that's just a quick review of the research. If you're interested, we've listed some references there. But what I want to talk about just briefly, because many of you may be familiar with check and check out, but the school-based features look like this. A student is recommended, we're looking at the purple portion of the graphic here, the student is recommended for check and check out. This is done usually through universal screening or a teacher referral or some sort of database decision rule, such as once a student has gotten 2 referrals or more. So depending on how the school decides to have students access, we then get everybody to agree to participate in the intervention. Once that happens, the daily features of the intervention begin. So, and that's all the circle components of the graphic. So they come in the beginning of the school day, they check in with usually a paraprofessional, somebody who's available before and after school, and they collect a copy of a daily progress report, or DPR. So what the DPR is, or daily progress report is it's a opportunity for schools to put their school-wide expectations on. So on the left, you'll see the elementary version. Their school-wide expectations are safe, respectful, responsible. On the right, you'll see a middle school version that has an A-B block schedule with 5 expectations. The goal of check and check out is to provide more practice and feedback and instruction on those school-wide expectations. So the expectation is that these have all been taught to students. The whole school knows what these are. But these are the kids who need a little more practice and a little more feedback and a little more instruction on how to follow those expectations. So student walks in. Some schools use electronic daily progress reports, some use paper versions, but whatever versions the expectation is when they go to their teacher, throughout the day during specified periods, they receive feedback and instruction. And sometimes as kids get older, particularly middle and high schools, the expectation is they're actually self-monitoring their own behavior on these expectations. So regular feedback throughout the day. And at the end of the day, they take the daily progress report to the paraprofessional, usually the check and check out coordinator or facilitator, and they see how their day went. Did they meet their goal? What we're doing with the points is we're adding them up, dividing by the total, and getting a percentage of points. So usually between 70 or 80% is a typical goal to receive some type of reinforcement. Then a copy of the daily progress report is sent home for parent home feedback. Sometimes that's daily, sometimes it's emailed, sometimes it's a paper copy, and some schools have said, we're going to do that weekly, we're not going to do it daily. But then the cycle begins if they bring it back the next day, if that's a daily feature of the school. The blue portion of the intervention is really the key to the intervention. Often we've done behavior cards in classes and so forth, but nobody ever summarizes those data. So this is the time when the check and check out coordinator summarizes in graphic form the data. And then there's a team of folks who decide what's going on with these students. Are they responding? And if they're responding, we just continue as planned. If they need more, some kids may need a social skills group. Some kids may they're having difficulty organizing themselves. Maybe they need some study skills help and so forth. The other decision we can make is, hey, they've met their goals. They've done so for 6+ weeks. They're ready to exit and graduate. So that's the basic features of check and check out in school, what it looks like when we're in school. So what are the key features that we should consider when we're talking about virtual check and check out? Okay, here's the key components. The biggest main thing that makes this intervention work is that kids are connected to adults in the building. So we know that if we can build connections between the students and adults, we can keep them in school, keep them off drugs, keep them out of gangs. The connection, I would say this is the #1 active ingredient. And this is the part where we're going to have to get more creative in terms of virtual check and check out. Another key component is the regular feedback, instruction on behavior, and the practice and self-monitoring. So this is another place we're going to have to get kind of creative, right? Because we're not seeing the student every hour, usually, when we're virtual. So we have to get a little bit more creative, but that's a key feature. The homeschool communication. Now, when we do this in person, when we do this check and check out in school, that tends to be the lowest fidelity piece of check and check out, but now we've got them in the home. And so the question is, it may look different, And parents may not be able to participate at all. Maybe they're working 2 jobs. But what is the way that we can access homeschool communication, even if parents can't participate on a daily basis or even a weekly basis? What is the way we can get information back and forth from the school, from home to school? And then the final thing is data are used for decision making. And we'll talk about what that may look like for virtual check and check out. So what are the steps? The first step in terms of implementing virtual check and check out is that we've got to figure out who needs it, right? And it's a little bit different. We usually identify kids based on office discipline referral or referral by the teacher and so forth. But in this case, it probably is likely going to need to be a team-based decision, and that the risk variables that we're looking at will need to be different than traditional or in-school check and check out. So perhaps it's work completion. Have they turned in anything when we're in this online environment? For those who are offering live instruction, are there kids that are making funny faces, cursing other students? Are they interrupting the classroom, jumping in, not muting their mic, right? What are the kind of behaviors in this virtual environment that are leading to disruption in the instruction? What we found in a lot of the schools here in Utah is that 25 to 30% didn't even show up for any of the instruction. So that is a risk indicator. Now we have to look, is it because they didn't have technology, they had no parental support or caregiver support? There may be other explanations, but lack of attendance is one thing that we do as for school-based check and check out, but we also can use it as one for virtual check and check out. And the kids to remember and not forget are the kids who may be anxious, shy, and depressed. So they're showing up, they may show up for these online virtual things, but they're never, actually actively engaging in the instruction. Maybe they're asked to hold up a card or do a Kahoot poll or something like that. And they're just kind of there because their parents making them be there, right? So we have ways to support those students who may have more internalizing behaviors, and we can use virtual check and check out to support those students too. So some information from the PBIS Center in terms of their guidance on adapting check and check out for distant learning is we've got to learn to assess kids and families differently in a virtual way, in an easy way, right? So you can have all kids fill out a wellness check survey, and basically the goal is overall, how are you feeling? So this would be sort of kind of like a universal screener for virtual learning types of things. We usually do this in school, but this would be a home-based version. How do you feel your at-home learning is going? And my family could use help with. And the part that I think is really important is, would you like your school counselor or in this case, in some of the schools we work in, social worker or school psychologist to contact you. So this would just be a way of seeing, there's consistent needs that are coming from a certain family that perhaps we could support with check and check out. So the second step of virtual check and check out is figure out, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to check kids in and check kids out? The first question is who's going to do it? So if you're already doing check and check out, you probably have a check and check out coordinator, who's the person who oversees the program, but maybe you also have facilitators. These are people who have said, I can check in and check out 3 to 4, 5 people, but I don't have time to do the data and the reinforcement and all that other stuff. So they'll do the reinforcement, but the coordinator may be involved in more extensive types of reinforcement. So those people may be the ones who actually continue to do check and check out. But I want to encourage you all to think about, there are other school staff, maybe it's other paraprofessionals working in different classrooms. Maybe it's a librarian, maybe it's a bus driver, maybe a cafeteria worker. How many people can we get to say, I'm asking you to check on this kid a couple of times a week. They need a really positive adult. They totally connected with you when you were at school. Would you be willing to do this? That way we can actually support more kids. Now, frequency, how often are we going to check and check out? I really think it's ambitious to do it on a daily basis. If you think about it, most coordinators have 10, 15, sometimes 20 kids that they're checking in and out. Logistically doing that on a daily basis is tricky. What is more likely, given the way that these online learning happens, is that a couple of times a week, there can be check-ins and check-outs, particularly if online instruction's only 2 days a week or only 3 days a week. Perhaps those are the times that you focus on check-in and check-out. But at the very least, if you can't do the 2 to 3 times a week, having a morning check-in on Monday, how do we set you up for the week? What are the things you need to do? Do you have the things that you need, the supplies to be ready, a quiet place to actually work if that's possible? And then in the Friday checkout, okay, how did it go? How did you do? Did you meet your goals and so forth? So as schools in doing virtual check and check out, we have to be really flexible. And we can't say, well, if we're not doing it daily, we're not doing check and check out. This is a whole different set of rules, expectations, and ways that we're going to implement interventions. Remember, if we're connecting, we're doing a huge part of the intervention. And no, some connection is better than no connection. So just be really flexible with families, what works for them, and also what works for your school staff. Times of the day, this is another time you'll have to be really flexible, because if you're checking all the kids in before virtual instruction and all the kids out after virtual instruction, that is really kind of taxing. So it will have to be distributed to see what works best for families and for schools. And then the other one is, how are you going to do it? Are you going to do a Zoom meeting? Are you going to do a Google Meets? Now, usually with most kids, seeing the person they want to connect with is really helpful. They want to see their teachers. They want to see their friends. But sometimes if you're anxious, shy, and depressed, or maybe you don't like to see yourself on video, actually seeing yourself on it causes anxiety. So maybe a phone call, maybe a text, voice recordings. You could share videos with each other. That may be a better way to connect for some students. So the third step in implementing virtual check and check out is that we need to align this intervention with student need, student family, and instructional needs. So what I'm going to go over are a couple different distance learning scenarios. We realize there are a ton of other ones, and that you can just pick the pieces that seem to work for you all. Every part of check and check out, when I go to train with a school, I give them the key components that research says works, and then they say, how do we make it work in this school? Virtual check and check out is the same. We'll talk about key components, and I want you to say what works for your virtual online instruction. So there's live virtual instruction that's synchronous, so you're having a teacher and the kids are online at the same time. There's live virtual instruction with home routines included. So what we're seeing is some expectations for live in person with the student, but there's expectations throughout the day that could be included in a daily progress report. So we'll talk about that. Then there are web-based recordings. So these are lessons that are recorded by the teacher, but not live, and the student can review them whenever they want, or they have some sort of packet. So it's asynchronous types of learning. The biggest takeaway that has to occur is that just like when you're doing school-based check and check out, students who receive this intervention need instruction on how to do the intervention. How do you check in? How do you check out? How do you earn points? What's the reinforcement? How do I accept feedback? How do I accept corrective feedback and instruction? Families need the same. If parents are going to be involved, can they be involved? If they can only involve in a minimal way, what are the things that would be helpful for the school, and what would be helpful for the parents in managing working full-time, have their kids home full-time, and so forth. For those of you that are interested, there's a link there to a training script, which is from Michigan's MTSS Technical Assistance Center on how to train parents. So as I mentioned, we realized that these are only a few of the possible distance learning, but hopefully you can see some ways in which it would work with your school and to adapt for your school. So in live virtual instruction, here's an example of a synchronous instruction. So we have a copy of a daily progress report. The school has be safe, be respectful, be responsible. And there's one synchronous instruction that happens daily, right? Let's just think it's a third grader or second grader and so forth. So the idea is that they're receiving feedback on their instruction after the session. Now that feedback can happen at the end of the session, And it can also happen if there's a paraprofessional who sat in the session. Many of the schools we work in, they don't have the resources to have a paraprofessional sit in, but we know some schools that are actually having larger online sessions and having breakout rooms that may be led by paraprofessionals. So that may be possible. So live virtual instruction with home routines. So this is a situation where there are live components to the instruction, but there are also feedback that can be provided by a caregiver, or you can have a student self-monitor their behavior. So in this instance, you have the same expectations: be safe, be respectful, be responsible. And then you have morning circle, live instruction, independent reading. Obviously that's done at home, either with parent support, maybe without. There's some sort of math application, lots of online math programs that kids work on, and then there's homework. So let me show you what a sample teacher feedback session would look like.
Hey Elliot, how you doing?
Good.
Good. So thanks for participating in the online session today. You did a really good job.
Thank you.
All right, so let's go over your expectations and your card. I'm going to share my screen, okay? So here's your Panther Pride card, and it looks like your dad marked down your how you did with your morning routine. So we're just going to mark down your points today for your live session, okay?
Okay.
All right. So for being respectful, you did a really good job with muting your audio, which helps everybody hear better. So you earned a 2 for respectful today. So I'm going to put that in there. So I did notice that you weren't always holding up your response card. So let's work on doing that every time. What might help with that? What was going on there?
My sister had a cartoon on in the living room, and so I was watching that sometimes.
Yeah, that's really tough when you've got a cartoon on in the background. So what do you think might be a better location so that you're not distracted by the cartoon that's going on, so you're able to participate?
At the kitchen table, probably?
Okay, yeah, the kitchen table, is that away from the TV?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so you earned a 1 for being responsible today, because you missed a few times with holding up your card, but I am sure that tomorrow you'll be able to do that really well if you can get yourself out to the kitchen table, okay? And you earned a 2 for your safe points today, because you did a really good job in the breakout room. When you were talking to all of your classmates, you were using kind words, and that makes everybody feel safe.
Thank you.
All right, so you did a great job. All right, so what I'll do is I will pass on your card to your coordinator, Mr. Smith, and then you can check out at the end of the day. Do you have any other questions for me?
No.
Okay, all right, great. Well, have a good rest of your day.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
He's cute, isn't he? I wanted to make sure that we also look at what a check-in session would look like for a middle school. This is at the beginning of the day. And so I want to make sure that we take really quick look at what would a check-in session look at to kind of prompt students for a good day.
Good morning, Evelyn. How has your day been going so far?
Pretty good. I'm a little tired.
I definitely understand being a little tired, but I appreciate you connecting with me this morning and getting your day started off on the right track. So I know that you have 2 online sessions that you'll be joining today. Do you have a good location where you'll be able to work for the day?
Yeah, I was planning on working in my room because my sister's been bugging me a lot.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I'm going to pull up your card for today so you can see your check-in, check-out card. You have been doing a fantastic job with participating appropriately during the live sessions and being respectful as well.
Yeah, I do like it when the teachers do the Kahoots and the polls. It makes it a lot more interesting.
I agree. So one expectation you haven't been earning all of your points in is being prepared. Do you have the pre-learning activities complete for your online sessions for today?
Let me check. Actually, I have a reading and a couple of questions that I need to do, and I forgot.
Okay, so what time is that session?
2 o'clock.
So when do you have time to get that done during the day?
Well, I think I will have time after my social studies session.
Well, make sure you still have time to take a break and get some lunch too. How about I send you a message around 1 o'clock just to check and see if you were able to complete it?
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
Sounds like you have a good plan for today. We'll connect again at 3 o'clock for a quick checkout after your language arts class, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
So what you saw there was a situation where you have a teacher who, there's some feedback sessions throughout the day. There's multiple feedback sessions, but the teacher's only providing one. Can you get caregivers to do another one? And the other question is, can you get students to self-monitor? We've gotten students as young as 3rd grade being able to self-monitor. That requires instruction. They need to learn how to do that. Some of the self-monitoring literature shows that even if they're not 100% accurate, the fact that they're keeping track of their behavior changes it. So just be thinking of that as an option if during the other times of the day. So in terms of a web-based recording, so teachers have pre-recorded the lessons. Students see them later. There's no live instruction and there's no live way to give feedback. And maybe they're receiving packets that they fill out whenever they can. So in those instances, you could still use a daily progress report like this, where they have the expectations, the routines throughout the day. And either, once again, the parent could give feedback. We know that this is not possible in many home environments, or it also could create chaos because the kid does not want to receive feedback and more feedback and instruction from a caregiver. The student in these situations can self-monitor. And another situation is if they can't, we realize that these home environments are really stressful, parents working, kids trying to get online. If that's the case, just don't use a daily progress report. What I would do in those cases is make sure that the facilitator or coordinator continues to check in and out with the student and has some sort of connection with them. And we'll talk about setting goals and reinforcement in just a bit. Oh, that's this next part. So we know kids who are at risk need more practice, feedback, and instruction on their behavior. We also know that they need more reinforcement once they start learning new skills that they are on the right track. So in a school-based check and check out, we usually say if you have 70 to 80% of your points, you can receive a reinforcement. Sometimes that's daily. A lot of times it's working daily towards a longer term goal, either once a week or every other week. Some kids need things daily. But with some kids, both in school-based as well as virtual, I would say you're going to need to lower the goal to 50 to 60% until you can get success. The idea is that if kids have to wait a couple of weeks before they receive reinforcement, they won't buy into the intervention. So it's really important they receive reinforcement quickly for meeting their goals. And some of the sample reinforcers include, you can have the caregiver provide additional activity time based on a certain performance. This could be daily. If they meet their goal daily, they can have 10 extra minutes or 15 on an iPad. I would highly encourage that the reinforcers are non-electronic based, because if we're all doing this virtual thing and it actually is live virtual, all of our children are spending way too much time on electronics. So I'm wondering, what I would do is make a list with your child or the student in your school who, of all the things that they love doing that don't involve electronics. Another way is a teacher can have a one-on-one virtual snack time with the student. Maybe a coordinator can play a virtual game with a student or facilitate virtual social time with other students. So one of the things I love is that if the coordinator has lunch with a person on check and check out, but they could invite 2 or 3 of their friends who are not on check and check out, so they're also getting reinforcement, whether that's lunch or a game. being online and doing online learning is taxing. It's taxing for us as adults. So just imagine what it's like for them to do this on a regular basis. So breaks from online learning could be used as a reinforcer, as well as extended time for lunch. And then one of the nice things about having online learning is you could actually do the same things that you did in your classes to give kids more attention. So they can tell a joke, they can tell a story, developing videos through Flipgrid. One of my favorite COVID types of things to do is that we have on with my friends, in fact, a good friend, Kimberly Breen, who's an expert in PBIS and MTSS, we do online karaoke. And that is something that kids can do with their check and check out coordinator. And it's something that they could do on their own, do it on a Flipgrid. They can actually record their video, and then the whole check and check out crew could get together and watch everybody else's karaoke video. So, or they could do some doodling. You'll see in the picture, they can do some doodling together. So the question is, make it fun, make it something the kids like to do, and lots of sharing is a good type of reinforcement. Now the question is, what do you do when you're not using a daily progress report? How do you provide reinforcement? What do you base it on? The main thing, as I said, is to make sure that you're checking in and out with kids on a regular basis, and that you could set a weekly goal with the kids that's unrelated to points. So it could be, for example, you work with a student, they say, I'm interested in reading 20 minutes daily, right? That's my goal for this week. I'm reading 20 minutes daily. Or maybe it's that I complete, 8 of my 10 math problems by Wednesday. These are pretty long problems. So the idea is that set a weekly goal and then provide reinforcement for meeting that individualized goal. Some more resources for implementing rewards or reinforcement during distance learning can be found in this hot link here from PBIS rewards. On the bottom here, you'll see a little picture. There are actually ways that you could check in daily with a Google form. So this is a virtual Google form that actually asks, you could do this for your whole class, but you could also do this as a check-in, check-out feature that asks them how they feel and whether they're ready for learning. So we have completed the first 4 steps. We've set up our reinforcement system. Now the question is, how are we going to use data for decision making? So the main thing is find a platform that you're interested in using. Hopefully, if you've been doing check and check out, you already have a platform. But if you don't, some of the easiest ones are, and most efficient and effective, is the School-Wide Information System, or SWIS.org. The School-Wide Information System is a system that tracks both office discipline referrals, so it organizes and summarizes and graphs office discipline referrals, but it also has an amazing system for tracking points on check and check out and graph, and it also cross-references those data so you can see how kids are doing. PBIS Rewards has a specific check and check out, and most of the schools that we work with don't have the finances to pay for those types of systems. So what they do is get really intricate with their Google Forms, and you've seen some versions of that. So the main thing when you're using data for decision making is that teams may need to adjust the database decision rules. So when we're in school, we can say, generally, when kids are meeting their goal 80% of their time for 6 weeks, maybe they're ready to fade. We know that kids are meeting, if they're meeting 70% of their goal, they're at least responding to the intervention. Those metrics are probably not going to work for online, for virtual check and check out. Here's why. Response to intervention may just be that they're showing up to see their coordinator, right? That is considered response to intervention. Maybe the other pieces are not happening, but we are connecting. And so we're willing to keep the intervention going because we're still connecting with that student who's at risk, whether they need additional support. So if they're not meeting their goals, there may be a lot of reasons beyond their control, because in the classroom environment, we can help provide lots of supports, but maybe it's they can't connect at certain times. Maybe they really can't show up for live sessions, synchronous sessions. So it doesn't necessarily mean if they're not meeting their goal that they need additional support. They may need additional support, but it's not tier 3 support. It's, I don't have the bandwidth to do some of the features of this intervention. How do we make it fit? And once again, and we already talked about fading criteria. So the idea is that we're not going to take the school-based way we did this and say response to intervention worked, it worked, it didn't work, and so forth. We're going to use probably, and as a behavior analyst, it's really hard for me. We're not going to be necessarily using numbers. We may use, I'm getting to see that every kid every day, and I know that they are okay. That's a metric for us, right? So we may use different metrics to determine success to intervention or response to intervention. So when talking about virtual check and check out, a few more things to consider. We know that families are really taxed during this time, so this may not be possible, but one thing that we would like to try to do is if you could include a checkout process with a family member at least once a week, you can head off lots of issues. You could find out what additional things need to happen and support that needs to happen in the school. So if that's possible and workable, we highly recommend that. And just like you would in school-based check and check out, if the key components in virtual check and check out are not going well, you don't scrap the intervention. You say, what needs to be retaught? Or what supports need to be put in place? So my thought is, we do not have a student join virtual check and check out, couple things don't work, we say, well, that didn't work. No, do we need to reteach? Do we need to teach how to check in? Do we need to figure out, they don't necessarily know how to earn points for synchronous online instruction. When they don't know, we teach. And so rather than, we all are quick, especially in this time when things are so chaotic, like let's just scrap that intervention, didn't work. My question is to you all is, have you taught it well enough and provide the supports for them to be successful? Because we know this intervention will work, and we know that if there's a way that we can make it work virtually, we think that the key components will work. So that's my take-home message, is that if we're going to make this virtual check and check out work, we have to focus on the active ingredients of the intervention, the connection with students to adults, the regular feedback and instruction on behavior, homeschool connection in some way, even if it's just communication, and data used for decision making. Remember, that may not be raw data, numbers, so forth. The main thing for school staff, we have to assess, we have to adapt, we have to monitor progress, and get ready. I think we'll all be doing this with instruction this year. Readapt, check and check out as often as needed to maintain continuity of tier 2 support. And my final message is, here's the deal. We have done check and check out for 20 years. We've done it in high schools, preschools, alternative and residential settings, internalizing and externalizing behaviors it's supported. We've done it at recess, attendance, for academic and organizational deficits. We can do virtual check and check out. So that is my final message, because we know we have evidence-based components that will support kids in no other way that we've done so far. So like I said, it's the top tier 2 intervention. And so we just had to figure out, how do we make this work in this crazy pandemic environment that we currently are in? So that's all that I have. And here's my contact. So for those of you that have the slides, feel free to email me. But what questions do you have?
Christina, before we jump into the questions, let me just give Leanne and everyone, if you could join me, a big round of applause virtually with your little reaction button or with your hands.
And thanks for attending. I really appreciate it.
And Christina, I'm sorry to interrupt you for the first question, but please feel free to jump.
Yeah, no, sorry. I should have started with reinforcement. Thanks, Leanne. That was really, really good. So I also agree that I think virtual check-in, check-out is 100% possible. But with that said, one of the things that comes to my mind throughout the whole entire thought process of this, that I am just curious what your thoughts are, is like in a school setting or in an organizational setting, you're kind of depending on like another teacher or another staff member or, a supervisor or whatnot to be like helping the whole process. And in this case, that person is the guardian, right? It's the guardian or it's the parent. Like even getting the kiddo or the student logged in or getting them to be set up for success there is going to be such a dependent variable, which is going to be the caregiver. And so how do we target these like goals of, 50 to 60% even if let's say the kid's home alone and both parents are working outside the home, and maybe like an 11-year-old sibling is the caretaker, or let's say both parents are full-time working all day, all long. And so it's like, without getting the parent or the guardian involved, it's going to so very much impact the student setting them up for success, that I don't know how to do it without the parental piece that you brought up towards the end. So that's like the thing that is like the biggest question for me. And I guess we won't totally know this until it rolls out, right? Like it's going to be a lot of trial and error and resetting. But my concern just for next year in general is like, every kid is going to have such a different in-home situation. And so how do we kind of just keep that in mind and adapt the first round of check in, check out to meet the child's needs based on how much like guardian support they have?
I think that's a great question. And I think it goes back to being really flexible and really, maybe they can't participate at all. But that doesn't mean that, as school-based folks, we're going to try as best we can, if there is live virtual instruction, to get the obviously we're talking tier 1. That's kind of the first need. But there are going to be I really think there's going to be social emotional needs that we need to meet that involve connection without demands for instruction. So if they're, whether that is, and we don't even know if this is going to be possible, but it's currently possible. People are doing home visits socially distanced and being able to check in. So even if that's in the beginning, there's a check-in at the beginning of the week, socially distanced. That's not feasible resource-wise forever. But I do think we can find pieces of this that will work. It's just going to be very different with each family. And it's going to be a challenge for sure. Some folks are going to look more typical to what we saw in the videos, that's actually going to work. But there's going to be some people that the really only components are, maybe there's somebody in the home, the 11-year-old or the 12-year-old has a cell phone, and you can contact that person to talk to the kid for 5 minutes, right? So I think we're going to have to get really creative about this is connection in some way, in my opinion, is better than no connection. Touch points, knowing that they could call, right? So I think that even if we have to get really creative about how we connect, I think when we're talking about check and check out, connection with those people on a regular basis and getting feedback on how they're doing is going to be our first goal for check and check out. And I think that we can get creative about that, and I think we can do it. We'll just have to get creative.
Yeah, I think like instead of like, I think part of the training of like the paras or whoever's delivering it is that what's going to be really important is to not just start out with like, here's your point card. These are the rules. Like, this is what we're doing. Like, I think step 1 is just like you were saying, like it has to just be connection at first. Like, hi, how are you? Let's play a quick game. Or like, what's your favorite song? I mean, like show me your house if you want to. Like, I don't know, something where there's definitely a connection before you're jumping into this like point card system that could feel a little intimidating. And I think a lot of caregivers are going to want that adult connection just as much as their kids. I think right now, anyone that's home virtually is feeling like they're literally like on an island. Like, it's just such a foreign feeling to not have to be able to walk through a school building or like call the secretary at the front desk, or, just what we've always had. So I think we're going to see more caregivers than not also want to have that reinforcement of a real live person to connect with.
Right. Thanks, Christina. Other questions?
I have a question. Do you think there would be something, I know it's going to be tricky to know if we need to switch to a different intervention, and we don't want to just switch because we're like, oh, the points aren't working, or, you know, the data collection piece is going to be tricky in itself. So I guess, like, do you have any thoughts about how we might know that, like, maybe this really isn't the right intervention for a student? You know, at what point do we maybe try to consider something different?
That's a good question, because to be honest with you, on school-based check and check out, we don't have research-based decision rules. The decision rules on whether to move a kid off the intervention or for more intensive support, that's the problem with PBIS or response to intervention for behavior, or MTSS, is that we've got, in academics, we've got really good research-based goals. If you're not reading this much by this time, we know what we need to do. We don't, I mean, we have some benchmarks for office discipline referrals. Like if they have 2 or more by October, they probably would benefit from an intervention. But a lot of that risk status depends on the school. So you have a school where 2 is nothing. You know, you've got like half your population that's got 5 by the end of October, and you've got some who 2 is like, oh my goodness, that's crazy. They're going to be blowing out the school next. So I think when it comes to, so I don't think that we have really good research-based goals in the school for check and check out. In fact, we have none. We have recommendations. I make lots of recommendations and schools teams decide. So I think, to your point, I think we're really going to have to get creative. I think, so if we're going to focus on connection, that's going to be a key component of this, regardless of how it looks. If we're not connecting with them at all, we may want to call it something else or provide something else, because if we can't get them to even connect with a person once, twice a week, and I know that's happened with some of our schools and the kids in our school, they just never saw them for 2 months, right? And that happened. So I think that if we're not able to connect, we need to probably intensify, right? Or intensify our efforts, if that makes sense.
I haven't done that. I thought about doing that with Washington County School District with Derek Smith, but teacher was so busy during that time, so not able to. But I was thinking, at the end of the day, we're going to look at the data to see if the data is going toward the direction that we want. Is the behavior getting better? But that one data should be coming from so many different components. I think at this specific time, technology competence is one thing. Is it feasible or not? Is parents are able to help out or not? Is teacher competent enough to implement interventions while with high fidelity or not? Their tech competency as well, There be so many things going on. If I'm given chance to work with a teacher and family all together, I'll really look into multiple components broadly. Teacher part, student part, and my part as well, technology and all the things, and find out what specific things actually impeding us from moving forward, But it's going to be complicated, problem-solving procedurals, I think.
I like how you broke that out, though, Shengtian, in terms of, looking at all 3 of those different factors, because they really do, and particularly in this intervention, and particularly, in the school-based one, as Christina mentioned, we, oftentimes if the parents are not able to participate, we can still, the success rate is between 60 and 70% of kids on check and check out, whether their parents can participate or not. And that's may or may not be the case here. But I do think that we will be able to build connection even if the parent is never home. I have hope that we can. And if we never can, that probably signals that we need to, provide much more support than we have with any other student in our school.
I know it's really difficult to tell now because it's a very new thing. But as far as who should be supporting teachers in the implementation of this, what is your recommendation for schools?
That's a great question, Annie. I'm really glad you asked that, because one of the things that people have said to me is if we don't have kids in schools, we may have to get rid of the paras. And I go, what? Or paraprofessionals, or educational assistants. And I say, what? This is a perfect job for educational assistants to be able to, teachers are planning instruction. They're trying to connect with people online. Sometimes they're teaching a group Tuesday, Thursday, a different group Monday, Wednesday. So the thing is, these are folks who could be dedicated to, and I would say the dollars would be worth it the prevention dollars of what it would mean to connect with people would be totally worth the amount spent. I don't know how people argue that with, you know, their legislatures or whatever, but my thing is that the paraprofessionals are going to have more flexibility than teachers, and they're going to be able to, you know, if the kid wants to earn a game or something, that's the person who's going to have time to do it and the flexibility in their day to do it. That's always been the case, but I'm concerned, what I hear from some of the schools is that, well, if they're not in person, we won't need the paras. And I what? who's going to help the kids who are at risk, right? So I really think, I mean, I'm not asking paraprofessionals to do mental health interventions. I'm talking about provide the connection pieces and the touch points that teachers really do not have the time to do, right? When you've got 26, or if you're a middle and high school teacher, 100 something kids, right? So that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that, Amy. Any other questions? Thank you all for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. I really hope to see lots of our schools doing this. So
Thank you so much, Leanne. We really appreciate it.